near the city of Misrata. There are also reports of fresh NATO airstrikes along the country's coast. The aim is to disable Colonel Gaddafi's forces, but the opposition could be suffering just as much. US war veterans warn the coalition has been using a poisonous substance in its strikes, which causes cancer and mutations. You may find some images in Ghana Chichikan's report disturbing.
These Libyan men cheer on top of a tank hit by coalition forces, unaware of the silent killer they could be breathing in as they celebrate. Though the Western coalition denies using depleted uranium in bombings in the country, others say there's a good chance weapons with the highly poisonous radioactive element have been used.
That kind of damage, there's a really good chance that was a DU round. I'm about 80–90% sure that was a DU round. That's really stupid. Anybody who's on it is getting low-level radiation exposure. See the level of the wind blowing? Yeah. That means the particles are in the air. So all of these people in these cars are being exposed.
Melissa Sterry served in the U.S. military during the first Gulf War in the early 1990s, clearing up battlefields in Kuwait. Back then, the U.S. dropped more than 350 tons of depleted uranium over Kuwait and Iraq. Pictures of bombings from Libya seem all too familiar.
You see how there's touches of red? That's the burning. See how it shoots out instead of a cone straight up, and you've got the flare at the bottom? That's a DU explosion.
Depleted uranium in military terms is highly efficient, relatively cheap, and powerful enough to penetrate the heaviest armor. NATO flatly denies its use in Libya. Even though the UN Human Rights Commission has called for a ban, countries who refuse to sign up include the US, the UK, France, and Israel. The smallest particles of uranium, nanoparticles, are the most dangerous. Once inhaled, they get into the blood and can spread into any organ, including the heart, brain, liver. Once the particles penetrate your cell tissue, this is when you get all kinds of genetic mutations. And people in Iraq, for example, breathe in that contaminated air every day. And experts say there's no way to fight it. In Fallujah, in Iraq, where the U.S. dropped thousands of depleted uranium rounds after the 2003 invasion, a quarter of all babies are born with a range of horrendous abnormalities. Higher rates of cancer, leukemia, and infant mortality have been found here than after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The U.S. and the British military admitted widespread use of depleted uranium in bombing Bosnia in 1995, a legacy felt today, with cancer and leukemia rates several times higher than normal.
We've got total medical confirmation all around Fallujah, Iraq, that the health effects of the uranium are there, and we see it throughout Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Somalia, the Balkans. And again, now we're seeing it moving into Libya.
Dr. Doug Rocky, who was a leading specialist in the cleanup after the Gulf War, says there is no way of actually decontaminating affected areas.
I was given a written memorandum to lie about the health and environmental effects of uranium munition.
He himself was exposed to depleted uranium. Almost all of the members of his team are now dead. Some fear that the suffering of those bombed in areas where there will be no Western troops will go unnoticed.
Now, if it happens in remote villages in Libya, I expect it won't be noticed, because who's going to go and find it out? And if the people there in the villages start saying, hey, look, everybody's dying here, they've all got cancer, and there's the congenital malformations and so forth, I don't think anyone will listen to them.
Depleted uranium has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, hence its description by some as the silent killer that will never stop killing. Ganesh Chakan, RT, Washington, D.C.
Well, airstrikes can never provide humanitarian help or liberation, says Chris Nynam. He's from the Stop the War Coalition.
Leaving aside the question of the legality of the operation, everything that we have learned from Iraq and from Afghanistan tells us, and should have told the Western governments, that you cannot bomb a country into democracy or liberation. You cannot create progress in a country by launching cruise missiles at it. In fact, what you find is the opposite happens. Civilians die, Very often the current regime actually becomes strengthened by the attack.
NATO is pledging to continue until Colonel Gaddafi goes, but Moscow says the coalition is risking thousands of civilian lives in Libya by going beyond the terms of the UN resolution. RT Serafirth has more now on Russia's concerns.
Russian President Dmitry Medvedev warned at the beginning of the week that Libya is at risk of total collapse and reiterated Russia's position that to be able to restore order, countries need to be acting in strict accordance with international resolutions. Now, he was speaking in China at a BRICS summit with the other countries, India, Brazil, China, of course, and South Africa.
The UN resolution must be fulfilled in accordance with the wording and meaning, and not with free interpretations of some states, because we voted for a no-fly zone to stop the escalation of the conflict so that we could separate the two sides. But what we're having now is a military operation. It may not be on the ground yet, but it's certainly going on up above. A number of countries were taking part, and then NATO stepped in. But the resolution doesn't say a word about it.
He also said at the summit that political and diplomatic solutions need to exist, that military intervention is not going to resolve the situation, that heavy weapons and ultimatums are not the best way to deal with this. Now, on Friday, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visiting Berlin for a Russia-NATO conference, again Libya on the agenda. He reiterated much of what the president had said, again clarified Russia's stance, making it clear that it's not the resolution itself that's the problem, it's the way it's being implemented that's raising questions.
Sarah Firth reporting there. France has blocked a train carrying Tunisian and Libyan immigrants from Italy. An unprecedented move since the introduction of the EU travel-free zone. Hundreds have been halted on the France-Italy border. Rome says the move appears to be illegal in violation of European principles. But France says it'll only honour those immigrants who are able to financially support themselves. Italy has granted temporary residency to tens of thousands of people fleeing the trouble in North Africa. Some European legislators say the only way to deal with the inflow of refugees is to change border regulations.
Berlusconi and his minister should have made it very clear that these people have no future in Europe, because by giving them just a hope of getting a legal permission to stay in Europe, he's creating another flood wave, so to speak, another migration wave from Libya, from Egypt, from Tunisia, who find it a possibility to come to Europe. Reality is really striking here. I mean, for now 10 years, my party and equivalents to my party have been crying out loud against the open borders, because it's created so many problems with illegal migration, with international crime and so on. The entire Schengen idea has failed, and therefore we need to step back into the situation which we had 10 years ago, where there was actually national border control, because it is for the benefit of the national states, it's for the benefit of the populations of Europe.
And also this hour we travel to France, where lawmakers are struggling to deal with a large minority community there. Muslims are in uproar as the country brings in a ban on traditional veils aimed at improving integration. Critics say the actual effect is very different. Also,
monuments like this one will serve as a reminder for future generations of man's first journey into space. But for now, there's still those who can tell the story of Yuri Gagarin and that momentous day from memory, adding another layer of color to history.
Those stories still to come, but first, the publisher of a Finnish-based propaganda website for Chechen terrorists has gone on trial. Although prosecutors in Helsinki have overlooked Mikhail Strosho's extremist links, instead accusing him of smuggling people into the country. RT's Anissa Nawi has been following the court proceedings.
He may not look like a supporter of terrorism, but Mikhail Strosho founded and runs this website, Kafkas Center, a propaganda mouthpiece for one of the world's most wanted terrorists and declared by the UN to have links with Al-Qaeda. Dok Umarov is responsible for some of Russia's most horrific recent terror attacks, the Moscow metro blast and the Domodedovo airport bombing, which in total killed almost 80 people and injured nearly 300. The site calls Dok Umarov a president, transmits messages about those he views as his enemies, and carries ads for books about the life of a Mujahideen Islamic fighter.
The situation is that the Kafkas Center and Strosho and his associates, they are working for the politicization of Islamistic diaspora in Finland and Europe. They want to make radicals.
Mikhail Storzer is being prosecuted not for aiding terrorism, but for illegally smuggling some 100 individuals into Finland, people who he calls freedom fighters.
The way that the Caucus Center writes about the situation, it's a contaminating, and the Finnish media is slower and slower writing in the same way. And what are they writing? They are writing that it's correct to make terrorist attacks in Russia.
This is the company that houses the website, located right in the center of Helsinki. Meanwhile, opponents of Islamic extremism or those who speak out against it are being persecuted by Finnish authorities for allegedly violating minority rights.
Juha Mollari, a Finnish pastor, was defrocked, fired from his ministry with no severance pay, and forced to divorce his wife to protect her from death threats he received. These came from Doku Marv himself, who said the pastor and his loved ones would have their heads cut off. The cleric's church decided he was threatening a legitimate website, and criminal cases for inciting racial hatred have been launched. Mollari says he's trying to make something positive out of losing his job.
Because all the time I have been busy with my work, but now I have very well time to concentrate on this subject better.
And spread awareness about a site that has ripped his life apart, spreading propaganda about a man who's torn apart the lives of thousands. Anissa Naue, RT, Helsinki.
This week, Russia's president and prime minister called media attempts to portray them as rivals. They're seen as the two major candidates for the upcoming presidential election in 2012, but say it's too early to speculate about the upcoming race, as Sean Thomas explains.